Hello everyone, welcome to the stream. Thank you for joining us for the first Deadstick live stream. Please let me know in the chat if you can hear me okay. Let's have a look. We've got a lot of people in the chat already. Thank you so much to everyone that has joined. Special shout out to Grenade32, who was here an hour ago in the chat as I was getting set up and said hello. I can see we've also got a number of Twitch streamers in here, so this is my first attempt at doing this, so no pressure on me. Go easy on me, guys. And yeah, it's great to see so many of you in here. I'm glad to see that you can hear us okay. We're going to have a fairly informal stream today. As I say, this is the first time that we're doing this, so there's inevitably going to be some technical difficulties. So we're going to do a bit of a Q&A. If you've got any questions, let me know. We'll try and answer your questions. We've got a build set up, so we'll do a bit of bush flying as well, show you some of the build, and yeah, we'll take it from there. So let's jump into the chat to start off with. I saw a few questions coming through as I was setting up, so if you've got any questions, let me know now, and we will do our best to answer. Okay, first question, Aeroware, how large is the map and what are your plans for the future? So I guess that ties really nicely into one of the reasons why Deadstick's been delayed. We've had a huge technical challenge, which has been trying to create the world. We didn't set ourselves an easy challenge to start off with when we said we didn't want to use any aerial footage. One of the big things about Deadstick is really trying to focus on creating a great experience for flying low and slow. And that means no aerial photos, modeling every single blade of grass, every rock, every tree. And we soon realized that those trees turns into hundreds of trees, then thousands of trees, then tens of millions of trees, and the existing pipelines that we tried to use just weren't capable of generating the size of the world that we wanted to deliver. So we had to strip everything back after our initial cost of demo and work on developing tech so that we could generate a world that was big enough. So for those of you that don't know, Deadstick is set in a fictional world. It's inspired highly by Alaska, but we're setting it on an island, so we don't have any artificial constraints. You don't fly up to a wall and it tells you to turn around. We've got the island, and then from there we can start to expand outwards. So the initial island we've been working on is the southern of two islands, and that is around about 17,000 kilometers squared. We'll have the same again on the northern island, which we're building up, and then we'll be expanding out from there onwards. Right, back into the chat. We'll be able to calculate weight and balance. Absolutely, we will go, once we jump into the game, I will show you some of the cargo loading and unloading, and then we'll be able to talk about weight and balance, how that works. Weight and balance is huge. It has a big impact on your flying, how the handling characteristics of the plane change. And obviously, when you're doing cargo jobs, it's something you need to be really aware of. One of the things we never want to do in Deadstick is stop you from being able to do something, whether it's being able to do a particular job because you're overweight or because you're not qualified. So we have various rating systems in Deadstick. You know, you can go and do your instrument rating, and so on, your night rating, but we don't ever stop you from doing those kind of jobs without them. There's just a chance that you might get caught and be penalized or fined for doing so. So we really want to keep it as an open sandbox. Grenade32 says, I haven't seen anything about TrackIR support in Steam yet. Plans for this? Absolutely, we will be adding TrackIR support. I know a number of people are interested in that, along with VR support as well. There'll be a number of little tweaks we need to make for TrackIR, because at the moment everything that you interact with is based on where you look with the camera, so we just need to separate the camera out from the mouse and have that as an option, but we will be doing that. Matt Davies, hello. Is there an SDK? There isn't yet, but we will absolutely be adding one so that third parties can get involved with modding and with adding additional aircraft. We want to open it up on Steam Workshop so that people can start to create some crazy contraptions which they can be using to explore the world with. Doofer911, hello Doofer, is there tutorial content to assist with getting those ratings? We'll talk more about ratings and the rating system in later developer streams. One of the things I found playing other sims, I love the idea of ratings, but I find that it's quite hard to communicate to the player or pilots what the success-fail criteria are, and also if you do climb slightly too high and then you suddenly fail and have to start again, it always feels very unforgiving. So the way that we've implemented ratings in here is that we've got almost like a checklist system. So for example, on your commercial rating, you'll have to plan a route between two airports and navigate there. You'll have to do so many landings to a specific quality, do a flapless landing, do a glide landing. All of those ratings can be, all of those checkboxes can be ticked during any flight. You don't have to do it all in one go. You can't fail them all and have to do them again. It's something that you build up over time. Once you've done all those, you can then apply for your rating, get the rating, and then use that to get more interesting jobs. Max Salisbury, is the focus more on all-out realism or accessibility for players? We're We're trying to do both. I think the first thing that I want to say, which is really important, is that we don't want to dumb down the flight dynamics or the simulation experience. It's really important to me as a pilot that this doesn't feel arcadey, and I think that's something we need to work on to communicate to people. Hopefully I can demonstrate some of that to you when we show the build. We really want to focus on realism first and foremost, but we're trying to be smart in terms of how we've implemented the control systems and in terms of the aircraft that we've picked, that they're simple enough that a newbie to the genre can just jump into the plane, turn the key and firewall the throttle and take off, whereas experienced pilots can worry about leading the mixture for better fuel economy and flying for better performance, those kind of things. And we'll go through some of that as we jump into the build. Let's have a look back through the questions again. What's the business? Will you be playing? What controller will you be playing with? Essentially, I've got a few actually, which is one of the things we'll demonstrate today. So I have my Thrustmaster here, which some of you may have seen. I bring to the shows. It's nice and compact and convenient to use on my desk. I've got a Warthog at the office, which I use, and we've got a gamepad as well. And I can show you the way that the controls translate onto those various different systems and how it works. Do you have damage? Yes, we can go through some of that as well. So I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's jump into the game now, and then we can start to show some of this functionality. I can talk through some of the features that people have already asked about, and then we can go for a little flight. So here we are in the build. Some of you may have seen this build before. This is actually a build that we took to Cosford. The reason we're using this one is it's a good opportunity to show a number of people on the stream who aren't familiar with Deadstick or haven't seen any of the content we put out before, what we can do. And then over the course of the coming weeks, we'll be doing fortnightly streams, and we'll be able to show off some more of the new functionality as we go. So we can see here we are inside our hangar. This is very much the hub in Deadstick where we start out, and this is where you can do a lot of customization to the aircraft. Now, the first thing you'll notice if you're new to Deadstick is that it's completely first person. So I'm stood here outside the aircraft. I can walk around and do whatever I please. There's no constraints on this. You can go wherever you want in the world. It's a truly open world. You can walk from airport to airport if you want to, but it'll be a little bit slower. So here we are at the aircraft. And again, going back to the controls, we've got this interaction system where everything you look at is entirely context sensitive. So we can look at all these components, click on them, and see what's going on with them. And you'll notice that as we highlight over these components, everything in here has got a color associated with it. And this is showing off the condition of these items. So this aircraft really is living and breathing. It's very much persistent. Every time you fly and come back to it, everything in here is going to be worn down or in whatever condition it was when you left it. So all these components have got what we call wear and tear, which sounds obvious, but the system is split into two components. Everything has got a wear associated with it, or a lifetime, very much like they would have in real life. And then we also have this concept of tear, which is based on you as a pilot and how you use and abuse the aircraft. So, you know, if you start mismanaging the plane or flying badly, then you can really damage these components, and then you're likely to cause them to fail, and then you're going to have big problems. So a big part of Deadstick is really trying to keep your plane alive and maintain it. So we can do our walk around. We'll do a walk around now, go around the plane, explore some of the things that you can check, and then we'll start to load some cargo in, look at upgrades, and we can go for a little flight. So we can see here our oil, we've got 4 quarts in there, which is orange. That's actually fine for this flight, so no issues there. Our propeller's all good. Air filter, we can see we've been for a few flights. It's getting a bit clogged up. Fine for now. We may want to look at changing that in the future. And then in here, all these components as well. So the starter motor is a great example of tear. If you start the engine and then were to try and crank it again, it's easy to get the gears of the starter motor mashed up. And then you're going to start to have problems with that. It's going to fail. You won't be able to use that in the future. So if you find that you're stuck out without a starter motor, you'll have to hand swing the propeller. So if we come around here, you can see we've got the static port and pitot tube for our airspeed and altitude. These are clear. Always worth checking these to make sure that we've got airspeed, and we've got our stall warner, which we can't test because the master switch is off. So let's jump inside quickly. And again, all these interactions, getting in and out of the aircraft, it's all just a case of clicking on everything. Okay, stall warner's working. Turn the master switch off. In fact, we could check our lights as well. Let's check our lights as we walk around. So nav lights are working, and the rotating beacon's working as well. So we'll turn the battery off, turn the master switch off. Sorry, don't want to drain the battery. So if we jump back inside, turn that off. In fact, if we come and have a look now, we can probably see, yeah, we can see that there's actually been a little bit of draw on the battery there. Not very much, it's gone down to 99%. But the battery is something, depending on the temperature and what you do, if you're trying to do a lot of starts on the engine, if it's hot or cold outside, you know, it's very easy to drain the battery down and be stuck with a flat battery. So again, that's something to be aware of as you're flying the aircraft. So we'll wander around, check the condition of the wings. We have our ailerons here and flaps, all in good condition. It's not a feature in this build, but in the latest build now, it's possible to actually grab hold of all of these, do full and free movement checks, and make sure that they are all moving correctly and as they should be. Some of you that have played this build will know how easy it is to crash into the hangar doors and get the plane stuck. We've now added a tow bar, so it's possible to pull the plane back out again if you do that. We can't do that in this build, so let's hope that I don't crash the plane. So let's just jump back to the chat quickly, see if there's any other questions before we start looking at the cargo loading and some of the upgrading. So are you playing with the keyboard and mouse? I'm actually doing a mixture. So at the moment I'm playing keyboard and mouse. We've got W, A, S and D for first person controls, and then the mouse, which you can use. So generally, if you're playing on PC, close to the PC, that's a good way of doing it. You can walk around and then you have the joystick, or you can also play on a gamepad, and we have that hot swappable as we go. So let's come around to the back of the plane now. We've got some cargo items here. So again, everything here is interactable. We can open and close all these compartments. And when you're doing jobs, we're not going to show off the jobs today. That's something we'll do in the later streams. But essentially, it'll be your task to deliver cargo to various airports around the island. And it's up to you to determine how you do that based on the jobs that are available, and trying to weigh up risk and reward. So if you want to try and fly, you know, into bad weather, into storms and icing to earn extra money, you can do that. If you want to sit out and avoid doing that, you can do it. So it's completely down to you. But here we have some examples of some of the cargo items that we can take with us. So we'll pick up this big barrel here, and we'll place this in here. Now, if you look carefully, I've not actually placed it yet. So we've got a snapping system in here. You can see as I move it around, it's trying to intuitively snap into sensible places within the aircraft. Where you place it will affect the weight and balance of the plane. And the simplest way to demonstrate this is if you focus on the suspension of the aircraft now, I'm just going to click to place it. And you'll see how that's actually imparted a load on the aircraft. I'll lift it out again. You can see how it's reduced the weight of the aircraft. And if I place it in, it's actually placing it. All these items are designed to be intuitively stackable, so they'll all kind of stack in together. And another thing that's really interesting with this, as I say, each item has got its own weight associated with it. If I start picking up items and stacking them up on one side of the aircraft rather than the other, then you'll start to see a rolling imbalance, and you'll feel that with the plane as you're flying it. So you need to be sensible about how you load these up. Now, these items are, other than the barrel, are fairly light, so we don't have to worry too much about center of gravity. But as you become more experienced and take on bigger loads, it will really be down to you as a pilot to determine if you want to do multiple loads, or if you want to try and fit everything in there and fly grossly overweight, and how you manage weight and balance. So again, I think the most important thing here to emphasize is that we're really trying to simulate the experience of being a pilot rather than just a plane. And it's all about the decisions you make as a pilot. So let's shut that up now. We've got some cargo items in there that we can take to fly. So before we go anywhere though, we're going to come over to here. Now this is inside our hangar, is our workbench. And this is what we can use to modify the aircraft. So I'm just going to quickly turn myself off so that you can actually see the whole screen here. And in here we have our customization system. So once you've earned money, you can then use that to maintain your aircraft, but you can also use it to upgrade the aircraft. So you can do purely cosmetic things like change the color. So we'll buy a couple of these, and then we can start changing liveries as well. And we will add the functionality for you to be able to add your own liveries in here as well via Steam Workshop. So we're going to try and make this as customizable as possible. We can start improving the performance of the aircraft by adding slats, vortex generators. Let's add some vortex generators on here. Woody's asking, is there music on the menu? There's no music yet, but there will be. That's one of the many things that we have to add. Now, what bush plane would be complete without giant Tundra tires? So you can see in here how we have a couple of the tires available, a number of them are locked off, and that all ties into the progression system that we have in Deadstick. So when you start out, there's a few items available. As you fly and earn reputation, these features will unlock, and then you'll be able to purchase more upgrades for your aircraft and fly more advanced jobs and into shorter and tighter strips. So we'll stick these tires on here. There we go. Right now we'll jump out of the customization. And we will jump inside our aircraft. So we'll close our doors. And again, as I said, we want to make the aircraft as accessible as possible. I'm just going to switch back to the other view. We want to make the aircraft as accessible as possible. So the beauty of this cub is that you can just turn on the master switch, turn the mags and firewall the throttle, and we're good to go. If you're more experienced as a pilot, you can go through your checks, and all that is going to be faithfully represented in the aircraft. Let's have a look at the questions. Is multiplayer available? Yes, we are. Well, we're working on multiplayer. We've been fairly tight-lipped about that so far because we want to make sure that we get multiplayer right. So we can't confirm when multiplayer will be released. It will be coming out at some point during early access. There's two sides to multiplayer. The first one is what I call a passive multiplayer. So when you're playing your single player experience, we really want it to feel like the world that you're flying in is inhabited by other pilots. So as you're flying around, you'll be seeing other pilots flying around delivering cargo to their clients and flying in the same world as you. You'll also be able to tune in using the radios to various different stations and be able to communicate with them to make announcements as if you're about to take off or land. So we really want to make it feel like a believable world. Now, because of the nature of the experience, there's a few quirks around how that works, but we'll also have a free flight mode as well, where you can load in with friends and be able to fly in formation with them. And eventually the intention is we will be able to do full shared cockpit, have someone in the back navigating while you're in the front. That definitely won't be coming out in the first iteration of multiplayer, but it is something that we're going to be building on. We definitely see a lot of potential with multiplayer, and there's huge potential for what we could do with it in terms of stall competitions, that kind of thing. So it's early days yet. We just want to get the basics in where we're sharing the same world, where you can fly around, and then over time we'll start to add to the complexity of that. So I'm going to do a quick check for the aircraft before we start it up. So the trim is neutral. We've got both tanks selected. Throttle we're going to open up slightly. Mixture full and free is rich. Carb heat fully forward. Don't know what the elevation is here. We'll just stick it to 0. Radios are off. Let's put the master switch on. Now again here, all of the electrical loads are fully simulated. So if I start, excuse the label here, which is incorrect. If I start switching lights on and off, you can look at the ammeter there and you can see the effect that's having on the loads. All these circuit breakers can be popped. In fact, the little example I put in this build was if I turn the Avionics master switch on here, then you're going to see the load that's coming through here. And we've set the transponder to draw far too much current. So if I try and turn the transponder on now, you'll see that the radios have gone off, and in fact it's popped this fuse. So it's a purely an example just to show how this system works. If I turn that off now, we can put the circuit breaker back in and the radios are all good. So we've got some example frequencies in here. These are actually, I guess you could call them Easter eggs for the demo. If anyone flies in the UK, perhaps you'll know what these frequencies are. I'll be interested to see in the chat if anyone recognizes those frequencies. So we have our transponder here. Oh, which I can't turn on, of course, because of the circuit breaker. So we'll leave that off. The radios will turn off for now. Throttle we've got open. Okay, let's try and start her up. I started very easy. Okay, starter warning light is out. I'm just going to quickly taxi out the hangar so we can actually get flying. Oil pressure is good. And I may have just clipped the wing. Yes, we've just got away with that. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to jump over to the gamepad. Now the gamepad's really interesting because I think a lot of people assume that to play on a gamepad, we'd really have to dumb down the experience. But actually what I found is that the gamepad, with a bit of tweaking to the controls, offers up some really interesting possibilities. So the first thing we can do is put the rudder on the triggers, which is really nice. So you have nice rudder control. We have the camera Oh. We have the camera on the stick here so we can look around, and then the other stick is of course our flight stick. But the other interesting thing we can do is use the bumpers for differential braking. So you have full control in terms of rudder and brakes with the gamepad. So again, we don't really see the gamepad as being a compromise at all. We can actually do some really nice stuff with the rudder and the brakes to give you full control, just like you would have if you're flying with a HOTAS. Anyway, I'll put that down for now. We'll jump back in here again. So I'm gonna taxi out using the mouse and keyboard, making some S turns to make sure that we don't crash into anything, and then we'll just take off on the taxiway because it's a bush plane after all. Now temperatures are slowly rising up. So we'll do some quick power checks just to show you what to do. Again, if you're a beginner and you don't know how to do any of these, you don't have to, but it's a good way of identifying any issues with the aircraft before you take off. So we've got our brakes on. Tank, we'll just leave it on both for now. We'll stick the throttle up to 1700. So again, all this stuff is context sensitive. You can either interact with it through the mouse or through keyboard controls for core controls like the flaps and the throttle. So we'll check our mags. Left, right, check. Temperatures and pressures are good. We can do a carb heat check. Brakes are a little bit spongy there. You can see they're not quite fully holding. Throttle back to idle, and then we'll reset back to 1200. Okay, let's get our avionics back on again. That's all looking good. Stick some lights on. Landing lights we don't actually have. That's one of the upgrade items. Sorry, someone was saying earlier in the chat, which I completely forgot about, is whether you'll be able to upgrade the avionics in the aircraft. Now you'll notice, if you look here, there are various panels that are blanked off. Now all these are avionics that you can actually upgrade, and there's a number of them. So you can get an artificial horizon. There's VOR, so you can do some improvised approaches and instrument flying once you get a little bit more experience in there. We do have a constant speed propeller unit that you can get in there when you start changing the propellers out. There's also a little GPS that will give you much later on, and a little hula doll as well. So there's various other upgrade items you can do inside the aircraft as well. Aviator Gamer says AI is the first buy. We may be a little bit mean actually and block that off a little bit. I think one of the things we really want to create in Deadstick is a respect for the weather and a fear of the environment. And you know, if we give you an attitude indicator straight away and allow you to fly in clouds, then it's just a little bit easy. So it'll be partial panel for early players, but then once you've earned some reputation and upgraded it, it's something that you can then buy. Okay, let's get in the air. Let's take off. We can then look at some of the changes, some of the work we've been doing on the environment, how that all works. We can look at some of the instruments and various other features. So let me get lined up. So I'm transitioning over to the joystick now. So I've got twist rod on the joystick. I'm not using pedals, and then I'm using the keyboard for throttle at the moment. So we'll get straight. Let's get the throttle in. Trying to keep it straight. Tails up. We'll build up a little bit more airspeed. Okay, then dump in some flaps and get up into the air. Now she's actually struggling to climb a bit here. I think having that barrel in the back was perhaps not the most sensible decision. Max Salisbury slope runways, absolutely. Actually, another thing that's worth pointing out is that the airport that we took off from there is a tarmac runway, and when you start out you will be very much flying from tarmac runways initially, but over time you will start to discover more and more dirt strips, and then as you start to kit the plane out better for stolen off-airport backcountry landings, you'll be doing a lot more flying in those locations. So we have something called our discovery mechanic. When you start off, you've got your map and it's got all your charted airfields on it, but there'll be a number of very small bush strips that are scattered around the map, and it's up to you to try and locate them. If you land on them, you unlock them, and then they can be destinations that you can deliver cargo to in the future. So we've got this whole discovery element as well. It's about you trying to, you know, take advantage of the environment and use it to as best as you can. All right, let's get rid of some of these flaps. Well, my intention was to take you up this little mountain pass here, and then we could fly around the backs of the mountains, go up into the clouds, show the clouds off, and then come back to land. However, I'm really struggling to climb here, which is interesting. So we might not be going quite that far after all. Throw the barrel out. You actually can't. You can't throw stuff out in whilst you're flying yet. Maybe we'll add that. I know one thing that would be very cool to add for multiplayer would be flower bombing. So being able to fly along and throw stuff out would be very cool. You can actually open the doors as you're flying. We've got our window here, and you can hear the wind noise there. If I shut the window, it's nice and quiet, and as I open it up, we can hear all the wind coming through. Right, I'm not sure this is going to end particularly well here, but we'll go for it. If the worst happens, then at least we can show off the crash model. Let's go to the outside view. Show off some of the terrain here. So the way that we've approached the environment now is very different to what we were doing before. And as I say, it's essentially a fictional location, but what we've actually gone with is we're using real world height data. We've actually looked very closely at Alaska and tried to find features that we particularly like in terms of you know, mountains or valleys and passes. And we've grabbed that height data and then essentially built a mosaic out of it. So we take all the features we like and then we tile them all together to create a kind of condensed version of Alaska, of all the fun and challenging bits and all the passes, and then we can kind of move them around and sculpt them to our advantage to create a really fun and challenging and condensed experience for people to fly around and explore. And then the real challenge is, once we've got that height data, obviously we need to populate it. So we then if people are interested perhaps in some of the future streams, we can show off how we go around the development side of that. But essentially we run it through a lot of processing where we can start to erode it and determine you know, what geological processes would have happened to it in terms of, you know, where you would get sediment and deposit, and we can feed that into our texturing system to determine where we want to place rock textures and grass textures, and then on top of that, once we've got those textures down, we can start to populate the world in terms of individual blades of grass and trees. Obviously when we're looking at tens of millions of trees, we can't be placing them all manually, so we've had to do a lot of work in terms of creating the systems to be able to do that. So we're managing to slowly gain some altitude here, which is good. Let me just check my fuel. I didn't even check the fuel before the flight. So up here we've got our fuel gauges, sight gauges. And again, one of the things you'll notice here is we've really tried to make the planes feel as physical as possible. So we've got the keyring here, which you can see you can throw around as you fly, but also the sight gauges. If I bank the plane over, you'll see that actually the fluid in the sight gauges starts to move around. So everything in here we've tried to make living and breathing. Grenade 32, wind roll off the mountains, mountain flying is dangerous. Absolutely. One of the things we showed off at Cosford, I'm not going to do it now because I'll have to stop the flight, is that we do simulate all the topographic effects of wind. So as you're flying along, you know, depending on if you're flying on the leeward or windward side of the mountains, you're going to get updrafts and downdrafts. So you have to be very, very much aware of what the wind is doing, and particularly if it's a windy day, you could really get caught out if you fly into a tight pass or you fly on the wrong side. So definitely recommend doing all your ridge crossings at 45 degrees on windy days, or avoiding the mountains altogether if it gets too strong. McSalisbury, will there be seasons? Not initially. We will be looking at adding them. We've got dynamic weather in there that will change as you progress through, so the weather will get harder the more experience you get, but we won't be having seasons initially. We will have you know, dynamic weather effects, and that will affect the landscape in terms of you know, wetness and what the surface feels like, but we won't be having distinct seasons yet. It's something that we'll look at adding in the future. Spankybus, art question. What are you guys... sorry, just moving up and down. Lighting is very flat. Yeah, absolutely. So the hangar that you saw there didn't have any of our lighting in it, which is why it looked very flat. And same here. We've got... I'll show you some of the dynamic time of day stuff in a minute. But yeah, there is... this was an earlier build before we'd done a lighting pass. So yeah, there is... as you say, it's quite flat at the moment. So in fact, what we can do now, if I come out to the external view here, we'll just... pull the camera around to admire a plane, and then I've just mapped. This isn't something you'll be able to do in the story mode, but I've got the time of day here. So you can see as I pull the time of day through, you can see the volumetric clouds there. So a few people have asked what we've used for our cloud system. This is all using True Sky, so we've got full volumetric clouds in here as we're flying around, and we have a full time of day system. So if I can gain some more height, we'll start going up into the clouds, and then we can have a look at the volumetric cloud effects. Yeah, I think we might have an alternator failure, as pointed out there, because the low volt light is on. Let's have a look at our ammeter up here. We're not generating any charge, so we could well have a flat battery. And again, that's the level of detail that we go to in the systems here. It's very easy for to fly along and have failures and not realize, and it's something that you need to be vigilant about when you're flying. You know, it's not something that we pop up with warnings all over the screen to tell you about. You need to make sure you're doing your checks, and that you're being vigilant with all these things before you go for your flight. Let's see if we can get through. Let's do something silly here and try and get over these mountains and through the cloud. I'm sure this won't end well. Spanky Bus says, how many aircraft will be available at initial release? For the first version, it's just going to be the one aircraft. We've spent a lot of effort in trying to make sure that we get the flight dynamics correct, and making sure that all the upgrades and customization work. So rather than trying to go wide and do lots of aircraft but not having so many features, we really want to get one right, and then once we've got the foundations there correct, we can go and add more aircraft after that. Right, you can hear the stall warner there. I'm right on the stall buffer, and we'll start to see some shake there if we push it too much. I think I might just make this, or famous last words. That was incredibly forgiving. This probably won't end so well now. Well, it's a good job I put those Tundra tires on, let's say that. Yeah. So let's bring it back around. Let's see if we can find the airstrip. We'll put it back down and land, and then we'll show off some of the environment lower down as well. And we've been very, well, I suppose not particularly high, but you know, we really want in Deadstick it to shine when you get down low and slow. So in fact, let's go for a little flight. We could always crash it into the trees, and then we can show off some of the vegetation and the systems that are involved there. Steph Stuntpilot, will the flight model be improved further? Absolutely, it's something, it will never be finished. It's something, you know, there's always things we can do to improve it, whether it's the stall spin characteristics or the ground handling characteristics. There's always things that can be done to make it better, and that's definitely the element that I enjoy tweaking the most, is the flight dynamics, trying to get them as realistic as possible. And as I say, I don't think they'll ever be finished. I'm sure there's always things that we can tweak. If you fly this at the moment, you know, in the normal regime of flight, it feels pretty good. Stalling is okay. When you get into a spin, it doesn't behave quite as it should. That's a hard thing to simulate. That needs a little bit of work. And also at the moment when you're coming into land, you do tend to run out a little bit of elevator authority. So there's a few things we need to do still to tweak it to make it right for launch. But even beyond that, you know, it's something that we can keep working on. When will we see a newer build? In the future streams, every stream we'll do will be showing off new features from now on. Because this was the first stream, it was a great opportunity just to try and get things up and running. I wasn't sure quite how many technical difficulties we would have. Seems to be running fairly smoothly so far, although my little light that I've got up here has got a flat battery, so I hope the webcam's not too dark for you all. But yeah, certainly over the next few weeks we'll show off some of the new features we're working on. One of the things I'm working on at the moment is the weather and icing, so we'll be able to show off some of the icing effects when you start flying into clouds below the freezing level. We'll also start to show off some of the job system, how that works, and how you can gain and lose reputation. Does maintenance reset when you make upgrades? It depends what you do. If you change a component, then that component will be new and it will have no wear and tear associated with it. But all the remaining components on your aircraft will still have the wear and tear that they did have. So we try to make it intuitive in that sense. It's not like when you repair an aircraft, everything is suddenly fixed. It's very much, everything is simulated on a component by component level. VR will be supported. We're looking at adding VR support for the initial early access launch. It will be somewhat limited. One of the challenges we've got with VR actually isn't the cockpit experience flying around. That's something that we had in very early on. The challenge for us actually is getting outside, being able to walk around, loading and unloading cargo, upgrading the aircraft, making all those menus and systems work nicely in VR, making it not feel clunky, making you not feel sick when you walk around. That's the stuff we really want to spend some time making sure that we get right. What I'm going to do is I'm going to crash here, show off some of the damage model. I was going to land, but we've been flying around for a long time. We don't have that much longer left on the stream. Oh, that was there we go. So that initial tree clip was fairly forgiving, but you can see in here, excuse the leaves we've got in here, the windscreen's crashed. This is all fully dynamic. We can jump out here and see the damage. So we've lost the wing. As I've got out to change the weight of the aircraft, you can see it's starting to roll around. We may well lose it down the hill. We've lost a wing. The propeller's all been bent. And all the damage you see here is fully dynamic. So we'll get back into the hangar and we can show some of this stuff off in a minute. But essentially, depending on where you hit the aircraft is going to determine where it crumples. So it's not like we're just swapping out the aircraft wing with a damaged model. It's actually reacting dynamically to the damage that is caused by you as a pilot. Now, this is actually a great example we can see here of the terrain and what we can do with the terrain system. So you'll see, you know, we do have every blade of grass here. It's moving in the wind. We've got bushes. We've got rocks. If we look at the surface here, you can see that you know, we've got tessellation working on the terrain here. So you've got every lump and bump being simulated, and these will have an effect on the handling of the aircraft. It's not just flat surfaces with a texture on it. You can see that things are uneven and will present challenges to you as you're flying around. Wildlife, no wildlife yet, but we've had a lot of requests for wildlife, so it's something we can expect to see in the future. And again, you know, as I say, you can explore the whole world in Deadstick by foot. And it's not like we're just adding detail around airports where you fly to. This detail exists everywhere in the world. If I wanted to, now I've crashed, I could actually manually go back to the aircraft, pick up those cargo items and carry them to the airport that I was due to deliver them to. It's obviously not recommended. It's going to take me quite a long time to do that. But it's theoretically possible to deliver everything by hand if you wanted to. So there we go. There's our plane looking somewhat damaged. I'll reset the stream in a minute. It'll buff out. Yeah, I think that might be optimistic, but yeah. Let's see if there's any other questions. Right, what we'll do actually is I'll just switch back to the slides. We'll reset the build and then I'll show you some of the damage model, the fidelity of that. So if you just bear with me, I'll restart the build and then we can look at some of the details on the damage model. There is actually an issue in this build. So at the moment, the getting a little bit technical, but the damage is very much simulated on a component basis, but doesn't get transferred through. So if you hit one part hard, you'll damage that part, but not others. So you could get in situations where you'd hit the propeller and really damage it, but then the rest of the plane would look absolutely fine and be unscathed, which is why when we did that initial tree hit, you noticed that the plane didn't get particularly damaged. All that's been improved now, so you know, depending on how hard you hit will have impacts on other parts of the aircraft as well. So let me just switch back again. We're back in our hangar here, and this is one of the things that we showed off at Cosford, but we'll do it again here, is just how dynamic the deformation is. So if I grab this and drop it, you'll see that it really does deform the aircraft based on where you hit it. If we jump up on the wing here, you can see how it ripples there. We pick it up again and jump on the front. We'll go back over the back of the wing here. You can drop it on the windscreen, and you'll see that we can take chunks of the windscreen out depending on where we hit it. And it's all fully dynamic. So our plane looking a bit damaged there. Let's try dropping one of these on here. If I can hit it. There we go. So, you know, you really can damage your aircraft You can see that our elevator's taking some severe damage now. And again, obviously we're not going to be in a situation to fly here, but if we were doing our pre-flight and we saw that our elevator was damaged, we'd have to decide if we do want to fly, if we want to do the job and risk having flutter or losing an elevator, or whether we're going to fly anyway, or whether we want to take the plane to maintenance. We've got a salvage mechanic in here. So the idea is that when you're flying around, trying to deliver cargo, if you do have a crash that's out in the wilderness, you can salvage it back to a maintenance facility and then you can repair it. Depending on how far away you are from that maintenance facility and how remote it is will determine how much it costs to salvage the aircraft back. So if the best place to crash is right next to an airport, because then you won't have a huge salvage cost, but then there'll be other ramifications there in terms of reputation, which we can talk about a little bit now. I can see there's a few questions popping up, so we'll just go through those quickly. Does your person walking speed change based on the weight of the item? It doesn't. It's there's just a one-off item or no item walking speed at the moment. We could add that, but I always find some of that stuff gets a little bit frustrating if you've got long distances to walk. Can you move the rudder ailerons by hand? That's been added. You can't actually in this build, but now it is possible to. So you can do all your full and free checks. So let me talk a little bit about the gameplay side, the job side. We've not really talked about that yet, and reputation, because reputation was actually another reason for the delay in the sim. Before, we had this concept of two currencies in the game. One was money, which you can use to upgrade items, and then the other one was reputation. We had this concept of a global reputation, so the better you fly, the more jobs that you do, the better your global reputation becomes, and then you're going to get people offering you more interesting types of jobs, whether it's carrying dangerous goods or fragile goods, those kind of things, or time critical jobs. Excuse me. What we decided was actually it'd be far more interesting and more realistic if everywhere in the world has their own local impression of your flying, a local reputation. So when you start out as a new pilot, no one's heard about you. No one wants to give you any jobs because they don't know who you are. When you start out, you'll get a couple of jobs to do and deliver those to airports. And then depending on how well you do those jobs, your reputation will start to increase. Then they're going to be likely to give you jobs and it can span out from there. But it's not just tied into jobs. Everything you do has an effect on your reputation. If I start off in the south and fly to the north where no one knows me, if I turn up at a new airport and start doing greases, doing some great landings, go and buy lots of fuel, use their maintenance facilities, they're going to like me. My reputation there is going to increase, and then I'm going to start to get reputation, and then I'm going to get jobs. Similarly, if I crash at an airport, if I crash at a big airport, depending on the severity of the crash is going to determine how that affects my reputation. So if I have a big crash at a big airport, then my reputation there is going to fall down, but also it's going to ripple through the local community. So all the airfields surrounding there are going to hear about it, and my reputation there is going to be reduced. Conversely, if I crash in the middle of nowhere, then there's a chance that no one will hear about it, or at least only a few of the local airfields will hear about it. So it won't have such a big impact on my reputation. So depending on what you're doing, you can really kind of play around with the reputation system, and that will have a big impact on the types of jobs that you're doing. Right, back to questions. Can let's have a look. Sorry, it's just gone off the screen. Could the aircraft be damaged unexpectedly? For example, in a hangar with other aircraft, could a wingtip be dinged unexpectedly? So at the moment, it can't. We don't have any damage that occurs when you're not playing. Obviously, in multiplayer, it's possible that could be a thing. We're going to have the option in multiplayer for air-to-air collisions to be a thing or not. So it's very much up to you. Obviously, if people are flying their single-player experience, but they're doing the passive multiplayer thing, so you're flying around in the world with other aircraft flying with you, then you may not want people to be able to fly into you and damage your aircraft. So it'll be an option for you, but it's definitely not something that's compulsory. Hangar rash is a thing if you're a multiplayer and people crash into you and you've got that turned on, but it's not something that we just do when you open up the hangar and find that the wings have fallen off because someone wasn't very careful about getting their aircraft out. What's the largest aircraft we can expect? I don't know what the largest one is. I don't think you'll ever see an airliner in Deadstick, that's for sure. It's very much focused on low and slow flying, and I particularly like some of the more agricultural aircraft, things like the Wilga, the Beaver. They're big inspirations. So we will start to get bigger. The Twin Otter, those are kinds of aircraft. DC-3, of course, would be an amazing aircraft. We obviously have to look into licensing for all these things. But once we've got the base version out into early access, it's something that we can look at expanding on from there. There's some good questions coming through. Keep the questions coming. Let's see what we've got. Technically got 5 minutes left on this stream. Let's see how many questions we can get answered in the next 5 minutes. Will there be support for cockpit builders? That's a great question. There will be eventually. For now, our approach has been to model input devices. So if you've got an input device, we're trying to build an input system that is flexible enough that we will support your devices, particularly if it's a device that will come through into Windows as a game controller. So if you're using a Leo Bodner board, for example, to hook up some input devices, then because that comes through as a standard input device, we can hook that up. That's fine. We aren't doing anything output yet, so we're not. If you've got radio panels or things where we have to push output back to the device, then we're not going to be supporting those at launch. But it's something that we will add because it's a huge part of people's flying. We know that people love to be able to hook up all that stuff, so it is something that we will start to add and integrate once we are in early access. Are there going to be authorities that can take your license away? That's a good question. The best way to answer that, we do have fines in the experience. So when you're flying around, again, it ties into the reputation system. As I mentioned earlier on, we have a license system, we have ratings. When you're flying around, we never stop you from being able to fly outside the privileges of your license. And so there's things that you can do that will cause you to be called out in those scenarios. And if you are, then there will be a fine, which will have a financial penalty and a reputation penalty. You'll also find, I don't want to give too much away, but there is also the opportunity to do some slightly shady flying. So, for example, when you start out, if you were to, you shouldn't be flying at night, but there might be some interesting opportunities that arise at night, which would be bad for your reputation, but could be a way of earning lots of money. So, we're trying to play around with that whole aspect of what types of jobs you do, and whether you want to be a good pilot and do everything by the book, or whether you want to try and fly outside of the rules but earn a little bit more money. Got to simulate local bureaucracy. Yes, we've talked about that actually, and having a license period where you have to put in a request for your rating. I don't think the wait will be quite 3 months though. I think people might have stopped waiting by then. Can we have the Heat Blur F14 in Deadstick, which is out today, isn't it? I need to go and check that out. Will it work on metric or imperial measurements? We're currently using the American system for everything because it seems to make the most sense. We don't have the option to switch. There's no reason why we couldn't have the option to switch for menus and conversions, but certainly all the kind of aircraft components, things that are built in, we've just kind of gone with the standard there. Will the pilot be able to die? We don't ever kill the pilot off or end their career. So if you do have a crash which is bad enough that the pilot would have died, we bring the pilot back to the hangar, and then they have to pay a salvage penalty to bring the aircraft back. So the aircraft will be ruined. They'll have a huge financial cost to repair it. They'll have to go back through and manually repair it. But we never force the player to have to start again from zero. Now, interestingly, there's been a few people that have requested that we have a hardcore mode where people will die and then have to start from zero. It's not something we're adding yet. If it's something that people really want, keep asking us, and maybe we'll consider it in the future. But it's a bit too harsh at the moment. Mods, yeah, absolutely. We will be looking at adding mods. So we should probably talk a little bit about the future beyond early access. So the current plan for early access, for those of you that aren't aware, is that we will be going into early access Q2 of this year. So not much longer to wait. And as I say, we'll be showing off some of the new features over the next few streams that we do. Once we're in early access, you'll have the one aircraft. All the job systems will be in there. We'll have the Southern Island in there to fly around with all of the weather effects. We really want it to be a complete experience, but it's a condensed experience. So once we're in early access, we'll then look at adding the Northern Island, increasing the area that you can fly around. We'll then start to add more aircraft. We'll refine some of the flight model features, particularly things like the ground handling and weather effects, adding more functionality there, and continue to grow, perhaps looking at some of the multiplayer, more competitive aspects as well. Modding support, sorry, just to go back to that, we will be adding our own DLC as well. So the plan is that we will continue to work on Deadstick once it's out and do regular updates, including adding more aircraft. So the plan is to add more aircraft for free if we can. Eventually we will be looking at doing paid add-ons, but they'll take the form of a whole new type of location. So for example, Papua New Guinea, and it'll come in a pack with aircraft that would be appropriate to that location. Places like Australia. So we want to treat Deadstick as a platform and continue to grow it out. But at the same time, we want to support all those people that buy the game and enjoy it, and add as much content as we can to add value to the base platform. Question from Twitter: will Linux be supported? Not out of the gate. I think, especially being a small team, we want to get the version done on Windows first. We've got a lot planned during early access in terms of functionality that we want to add. We're currently 4 people, so that's going to tie us up reasonably well, adding functionality, improving the quality of the base experience. Other platforms, whether it's console, Mac, or Linux, I think we'll treat them all on a case-by-case basis, continue to evaluate them, and it will really depend on what the demand is. So, if there's enough demand, it's something that we'll definitely consider, but we definitely have to make sure that we pick the right battles. Bird Strikes, it's been on my list for a long time. It's something I want to add. I think that's going to get pushed back into early access. It's unfortunately, as cool as it isn't the priority at the moment as compared to getting some of the other systems in there. So VR at early access launch. I think I mentioned it earlier. What we want to do is try and get a kind of limited VR experience in there, because we want people to be able to experience it. Being able to fly around in this high fidelity world in VR is really exciting. It's nice to be able to do, but at the same time, there's a lot of things that we need to focus on making sure we get right in terms of being able to get outside the aircraft, wander around, load cargo, upgrade. So what we may try and do is get a limited version out where you can at least fly around in VR. You can't play the story mode, but you can at least experience it. And then through VR, through the early access process, we'll get all those systems in and polished up to work properly, so that you're not feeling sick when you're playing it in VR. Will early access be available to everyone to buy, play, or just some streamers? YouTube. When we release an early access in Q2, it will be on the Steam store. It will be available for anyone to play, so anyone will be able to purchase it and play it. Any news on price yet? We haven't got a formal price planned yet. We're in discussions about that at the moment. So once we know what that is, we will let you all know. We will plan to do a closed beta at some point. So some of you have been in contact with me requesting to do this. If you do want to do this, feel free to send me an email. We'll definitely be we'll have to keep the list fairly small. So people that have got particular hardware setups or flying experience, we'll probably prioritize, but we'll try and do some sort of closed beta. But it's not too much longer to wait for early access anyway. NOTAMs, yes, and airspace as well will change, so it'll be something to have to be aware of. Will we get charts for the fictional world? Absolutely, yes. In fact, one thing I didn't show you, I don't have the chart available in this build, but just one thing that's worth pointing out to you quickly. If I jump inside here, this is you can't actually see the screen at all. Let me switch across. Here we go. So I've just jumped inside the aircraft, which is still ruined, but you'll notice here in the corner we have this kneeboard. This is all very programmer at the moment, but in here is your plug. So when you plan a route on the map screen, this plug in its final form gets automatically populated for you. So you have your waypoints, your headings, distances, and times that you can fly in here. We've got a little stopwatch here that you can start and reset. So when you're flying around doing jobs, this is what you're using to navigate. So it's important to know when you take on a job, there isn't a little arrow in the distance saying this is where you need to fly to. It's up to you as a pilot to do your navigation to try and get there. And if you get lost, you need to try and find a way out of there. Thankfully, because it is an island, you can always fly to a coast and try and find landmarks to find your way around. It's also possible to land on the ground. If you do land and jump out, you can use the map to see where you are. But whilst you're in the air, it's very much down to you to try and use dead reckoning to find your way around. You can fly without a transponder. The transponder is functional in the aircraft, but it's not particularly relevant in the single player. It becomes more of a feature in multiplayer where you can use your transponder to find other players and fly around with them if you want to start doing some formation flying, that kind of thing. Same with the radios. We don't have any kind of robo speech for ATC or text ATC. I always feel that breaks the immersion. So the ATC really ties in with being able to use Unicom, safety com, whatever you call it, depending on where you fly, being able to chat to other pilots, make blind calls, and coordinate whether you're flying. So another thing actually that we haven't talked about in terms of the world is time. So one of the other things that we do is we accelerate time in the world. And the reason we do that is because you're flying around in a smaller area, but because we want you to be doing lots of takeoffs, lots of landings, we want you to have to worry about things like the sun setting, worrying about running out of fuel. If you're flying in real time the whole time, then it's unlikely that those things will frequently pose problems to you in a single play session. So by accelerating time slightly, the days go by a little bit quicker. You have to be a bit more aware of when sunset is, because lots of these strips won't have any night lighting, so you're just going to get stranded out of dark. And your fuel's going to run out a little bit quicker, so you need to be aware of that and make sure you're planning for fuel, because later on you'll start to find that there's either remote strips that don't have any fuel available, or there'll be fuel shortages, and then that's things that you're going to have to worry about. No, the strips aren't level at all. Even the runway here, let's go, and I'll go for a quick wander. We're rapidly running out of time here. So this landscape was actually created for Cosford, so we've since gone back and refined and improved a lot of this, but you'll see if I wander over here that none of it's flat. It's all fully undulating. I'm not sure. In fact, you can see it on the taxiway here. Not particularly well lit in these conditions, but you can see how it is all fully undulating. And so particularly when you get to strips, you can have big upslopes and downslopes. Can't see. Yes, it's probably not the best example. This is a reasonably flat runway, but yeah, they are fully dynamic in 3D. They're not flat at all. Not seeing the game, of course. Right, yes, that would help, wouldn't it? I was doing so well. Here we go. So hopefully you can see it. It's a reasonably smooth, this runway. In fact, if you look at the taxiway over to where the cursor's pointing now, you can see some undulation there. Okay, so you can see it. It just helps if I actually show the game. Well, I'll make a note of that one for next time. Right then, we are 7 minutes past at the end of the stream, so let's just take a few more questions, maybe 3 or 4 more questions, and then we will wrap it up. What's the steepest slope? There isn't one yet. We're still refining that. So we're trying to make some very fun and challenging strips, particularly up in the mountains. So you can expect to see some very, very interesting strips. I think, if you really want to get to the very extreme strip, we'll wait for Papua New Guinea. But yes, we'll make sure there's some very challenging strips, one way in, one way out, that kind of thing. Turbulence by terrain, yeah, we talked about that a bit earlier. We do have the topographic effects simulated, so you do have to be very much aware of which side of the mountains you're flying on, the windward side or the leeward side. And depending on the wind conditions, is going to have a big impact on the weather. Floats, water landings. We won't have floats with early access launch, but you will be able to hydroplane. It's not in there yet, but that's one of the things we do need to get in before we launch. So hydroplaning will be in there, water-assisted landings will be in there. Glass avionics we don't have. I've tried to avoid glass cockpits because they just feel a little bit too easy. They do a little bit too much for you. So by sticking with steam gauges, then we really put that pressure on you as a pilot to do all this thing properly by yourself without having a magenta line to follow. Any plans to be able to start your company in multiplayer so you can have friends do runs for the company? No, it's one of those things that's been a fleeting thought, and I'm sure it's something that we'll get a lot of requests for, but I think we want to make sure that we get the foundations right first. Once we've got multiplayer in there, people are flying around in the same environment, then that stuff is all very scalable. It's something that we can continue to add over time. But yeah, the key with that stuff is to try and build it incrementally. We don't want to take on too much to start off with and then deliver an experience that's just clunky or doesn't work. So again, it's something else that we'll be evaluating on a case-by-case basis. Will there be Oculus Touch control supported? Again, it's something that we'll be evaluating once we get the early access launch done. I suspect there'll be quite a lot of demand for that, and it does tie in nicely with the simple physical controls we've got in the cockpit. So I think it does make sense to look at that. Pilot fatigue planned? Yes, absolutely. You will need to make sure that you take rest breaks. Another thing I can't show you in this build is we've got a tent that you can use for time scrubbing. So if you land out in a remote strip and the sun's setting and you can't fly back, then you can get the tent out, sleep in the tent to rest and also to put time forward, because if the weather's bad, then you can't fly. You can use your tent to sleep, skip forward a few days. You can't earn any money, but then at least you're not going to crash your plane. I'm safe checks, exactly. Icing, not yet, but I am actually working on it as we speak, so you will pick up on icing as you're flying around. Do you think the early access period will be in terms of months or years? I hope it'll be months, but it's worth pointing out that even when we get out of early access, Deadstick won't be finished. There'll always be things we can do. As I say, the plan is it's a platform, so it's not like Deadstick comes out of early access and you can expect in a year's time to see Deadstick 2. We really want this to be the foundation of a sim that we can continue to grow and grow, add more aircraft to, add more interesting environments, and then look at other locations and places like that. Bears. We haven't had any hunting either. Well, I may not have been paying attention. I've not seen any hunting requests in the chat yet, which is a favourite for whenever we take Deadstick to the shows. Fly-ins and camping with friends, yeah, that stuff would be really, really good fun to do with the multiplayer. So it's certainly something that we'll be looking at once we've got the basic version out there. And it's something we want to try and make emergent if we can. So we're hoping that when people fly in the free flight mode with their friends, then that stuff you can go out and do. And there won't be necessarily systems to support it, but at the same time, the game won't prevent you from doing it. Right, I think we're going to start wrapping this up now. One excellent question that's just come in is logbooks. And yes, logbooks are supported. So one of the things you'll start to see when we show the new builds is just how intricately everything is tracked that you do when you're flying. So when you take off, we measure your takeoff distances. When you land, we're looking at your vertical speed, your touchdown speed, the number of touchdowns you did, the number of bounces, the landing distance, the type of landing you did, whether it was flapless, whether you're doing an instrument approach. All those things are logged. They tie into your reputation, into your overall skill. They're all in a logbook that you can look at. You've also got your license that you can look at, which has got your ratings on it. Replays, no, we don't have replays yet. The replay system will be quite complicated because of the integration with multiplayer and also some of the systems that also have to work with it in terms of the damage and things. So I suspect we will do that at some point. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of requests for that. But again, it's for early access, particularly with the demand we're getting for making sure that we get it out there. We're just going to push that one back, make sure we get the foundations right, and then we can add that after early access. Are you going to be at Flight Sim Expo in Orlando this year? I don't think we've confirmed it yet, so I'm not going to confirm or deny, but we are definitely looking into it. And your release date planned Q2 of this year, so not too much longer to wait. No Vatsim capability planned. We're keen to look at, or very happy to look at integration with other third-party services, but they need to make sense. It's a little, given that it's a fictional location, things like Vatsim or things that are injecting real weather don't make that much sense because obviously we have no location to grab that data from. For our weather, actually, there's something that we haven't spoken about. We have a fully dynamic weather model in there, and the way that we've achieved that, obviously we can't use real world weather. So what we've done is we've gone and got 10 years worth of historic TAF and METAR data for Alaska. And we've used that. We've processed every single TAF METAR for the last 10 years and built a statistical model based on that so that you start to get realistic effects in terms of time of day and seasons and little quirks that you'd expect to find in that type of the world with the weather. Right, I'm going to do one more question and then we're going to close the stream off for now. Right, I'm trying to pick a question. Let's see some more questions come through, and then we'll pick a good question. So, just to clarify, Nixu says, "What season's nice?" We have seasons in terms of weather, and the weather getting more difficult as you fly, but that doesn't necessarily reflect in terms of what you see in the world yet. So things, you won't see trees changing color in autumn, or you won't see trees bare in winter, that kind of thing. It's something that we'll add over time, but the weather certainly is aware of the time of year. Some of these questions I've already answered, so I'm going to try not to repeat one. I'm going to try and do one more unique question before we finish the stream. Right, will players compete for contracts? That's a good question. Initially, no. So the multiplayer, when I try and describe it as a passive multiplayer experience, so you're very much flying your single player game in your own world, but you're seeing other people flying their game. So any jobs you do don't have any impact on other players or their economy and what they're doing. So the only way you interact with them is in terms of seeing them, being able to communicate with them over the radios. Over time, we'll start to look at adding shared cockpits, as was just asked, and looking at how we can have certain jobs available for players online. We've got a few other interesting ideas about how that can work as well with multiplayer, things like search and rescue. There's some really cool opportunities there in terms of competitions, fly-ins, all those kind of things. Right, we're going to wrap that up there, I think. Thank you so much to everyone that's come along. Hopefully that went smoothly. I don't think we had any major technical issues in there. as I say, the streams will be doing fortnightly now, so stay tuned. Keep an eye on the Facebook, Twitter, Discord. I try and chat in Discord. So if you do have any other questions, if your questions got missed, come along into the Discord and ask them. We'll try and answer them in there. We will try and come up with something a bit more structured for the next one now that we've got the technical issues out of the way. And yeah, look forward to showing off more functionality as we get it in. All right, thanks very much, guys. See you all on the next stream.